I love comic books. As a piece of extremely cool proof, I've got this photo here. A photo of me and Stan Lee when I was 14. I've been a fan since my grandma bought me a copy of Wolverine when I was 4 years old. Yeah, that character came as a bit of a surprise to 4-year-old me, but the best thing to come out of that early experience was the impression that, in these pages, I discovered a world very different to what I would find anywhere else. The more I read, the stronger that impression became. I started to discover this amazing pantheon of heroes and villains, all of them different to each other in ways that made me question how they could exist in the same universe. From story to story, I was seeing variety like I'd never seen before, and just when I thought things couldn't get any better, I found out there was another universe out there with its own rich history of heroes and villains, the DC universe. I've loved both Marvel and DC for years now, but I've always thought it was weird how these universes were ones that have changed so much, decade after decade, yet at the same time they've always managed to stay the same. Characters have been pushed to their limits, challenged in ways that have demanded complete reinvention, but when these moments of change happen, they're never permanent. There's always this weird resistance to genuine lasting change that stands in the way of progress, and that resistance will always kick in to bring a story back to how things have always been. It's almost like these stories all have a factory default setting that resets any progress made, returning characters to the most recognisable versions of themselves, and I think it's this that has held Marvel and DC's greatest heroes and villains from reaching their true potential. But that's not to say that the way Marvel and DC have been telling their stories hasn't worked thus far. I mean, they've both been around for almost 100 years. There's plenty in their current approach to telling stories about our favourite heroes that works, and there are loads of stories that excel under the constraints of comic book continuity. But I think that Marvel and DC can do things better. In this video essay, I want to take a look at what works so well in Marvel and DC's current approach to storytelling within continuity, but I also want to look at the flaws of this approach and propose some potential solutions to these problems that keep what works whilst giving mainline comics something they've been missing for a long time, which is lasting, honest consequences. One of the best things about Marvel and DC's approach to continuity is the interconnectivity of their stories. It's not only super exciting seeing one of your favourite characters cross over into another series that you love, but it also makes these universes feel that much more real, as these universes never revolve around one character exclusively. Every character plays a part in the stories of Marvel and DC. This interconnectivity also allows for moments like the one in Chip Zdarsky's Daredevil series, which is amazing by the way, in issue 7. For the past few issues, Daredevil started to lose his crime-fighting edge, which has led to him becoming dangerously sloppy. After he accidentally kills a criminal, he struggles with his conscience, urging him to both continue work as the Devil of Hell's Kitchen and to retire, leaving behind the life he can no longer control. As he re-enters his apartment, he discovers Spider-Man waiting for him. He tells Daredevil that this is his final day as a vigilante, and that if he continues his activities, he'll stop him himself. This moment would have worked with someone in Daredevil's story confronting him about his actions, like his best friend Foggy for example, but having Spider-Man be the one to stop him has a power that no other character could have in this scene. Spider-Man is a legend among Marvel's ranks. He's maybe the paramount superhero, and he has been for decades. On top of all of that, he's also perhaps the most famous embodiment of the value of responsibility. Having him appear here is an extremely powerful way to demonstrate just how far Daredevil has fallen. This paves the way for an equally powerful moment when Daredevil wins Spidey's trust again. This level of impactful crossover and intersectionality is only possible in the universes of Marvel and DC, universes that have been telling interconnected stories for decades, and that's something that in my opinion should always be a part of Marvel and DC's storytelling. I'd argue that another huge positive of Marvel and DC's current approach to continuity is actually weirdly the constraints of it. You've probably noticed that characters like Spider-Man and Iron Man have stopped aging past a certain ambiguous adult stage, right? Well, that's demonstrative of one massive constraint in comic book continuity, which is that characters can't naturally age and progress through different stages of life in the same way that we can, as this threatens the status quo of most of Marvel and DC's library. Take Spider-Man for example. He's been many things throughout his life, from street-level vigilante to fledgling Fantastic Four member to high-flying CEO. But one constant throughout all of this is that he's a young-ish man taking on the problem of balancing his personal life with his life of superheroics. That's the classic Spidey status quo, and it's key to his appeal to kids and young adults. This is something that the Marvel editorial team never want to mess with, and as a result of that, Spider-Man hasn't really been allowed to grow older or enter a new stage of life. I'll get into this in more detail later, but that's just to give you some idea of the constraints on storytelling that Marvel and DC comic writers need to write within. What I like about these constraints is the kind of creativity they encourage. What I mean is that writers don't have the obvious option for progressing characters, like age or relationships or children in most cases, so they're essentially forced to think outside the box. And over the years, this type of thinking has led to what I'm going to call hyper-creative stories. Two examples I want to focus on are Superior Spider-Man and Immortal Hulk. Superior Spider-Man is the story not of Peter Parker, but Otto Octavius, otherwise known as Dr. Octopus, on his deathbed planning one last chance at life through the body of his age-old nemesis, Spider-Man. He swaps bodies with Peter, trapping Peter in his dying body, but not without a cost. His mind receives an influx of the complete history of Peter Parker, with every experience that helped shape him into Spidey, and all of this emerges with his life experiences, convincing him to redirect his energies towards heroism rather than villainy. This leads into his own series, Superior Spider-Man, in which Otto aims at becoming a better hero than Peter ever was, in his own way, and I think this story is easily one of the greatest in the Spider-Man saga. Seeing a supervillain stumble his way into becoming a hero worthy of the Spider-Man legacy is a really clever way to advance the story of responsibility at the heart of Spider-Man stories significantly, without interfering with the Peter Parker status quo. Another story that I really like and think benefits from the constraints of continuity is Al Ewing's Immortal Hulk. This one in particular astonished me, as Hulk is one of Marvel's biggest mainstream characters, and these are normally the toughest characters to rework and expand, as the constraints surrounding them are normally the tightest, but Immortal Hulk is a complete reinvention of the Hulk as we know him, and I think that's because Al Ewing, like Dan Slott on Superior Spider-Man, had to really think outside the box. This series doesn't just return Hulk to his Jekyll and Hyde horror roots by exploring the intricacies of Bruce Banner's dissociative identity disorder, but finds loads of new horror influences to inject into the character, like visceral body horror, supernatural horror, and even Lovecraftian cosmic horror. Al Ewing has somehow managed to completely reconfigure the Hulk as his cathartic avatar for anger, in a way that's much more profound than just Hulk smash. The Hulk is now a figure of rageful rebellion against structures and concepts of the world that bind us all, and none of that fails or feels out of place. There are loads of other examples that I love too, like Jonathan Hickman's new X-Men series, Donny Cates' Venom, and Jason Aaron's The Mighty Thor, but I think these two examples illustrate my point nicely. It's this kind of hyper-creativity that I adore in the world of comic books, and I feel that a large part of this creativity exists in response to the constraints that challenge comic book writers. I love how Marvel and DC have handled their stories for years, but I do have some strong feelings about what doesn't work too. Sure, the constraints of continuity encourage Marvel and DC's greatest writers to rise to their challenge by becoming hyper-creative, but it also creates one severe problem: the complete absence of meaningful, lasting consequences. Let's use Spider-Man again as an example. I mentioned that he isn't allowed to properly advance into the next stage of his adult life. What I didn't say is that Peter has been married in the past to the love of his life, Mary Jane. But that threatened Spidey's appeal to younger readers, so the writers decided that it needed to be changed. If you aren't familiar with the story, you might be thinking, hey, how do you make Peter part ways with MJ, someone who's always been at the heart of both Peter Parker and Spider-Man? How do you make that make sense? Well, the answer is stupidly. The writers must have realised that they couldn't write a permanent split between them that was realistic, one that honoured both characters, so they did it in the most stupid way imaginable. I'll summarise this fast. Aunt May's shot. Spider-Man is visited by Mephisto, Marvel's version of Satan, who offers Peter Aunt May's soul and body restored as long as he gets Peter's marriage to MJ. Nope, I'm not making that up. It actually gets worse. We see the potential child Peter and MJ would have had together fade away, and Mephisto rewrites reality so that neither character remembers what happened. If this choice feels wrong to you, like one that Spider-Man and MJ would never make, that Aunt May would never want them to make, I agree with you. This bizarre story choice was made to return Spidey to more familiar ground before Dan Slott's creative team took over, giving them a chance to start anew with the character. But I hope you see the issue here. Sure, this awful decision gave Slott the chance to tell whatever stories he wanted to, but so much of that history behind him of Peter and MJ together was erased. None of what happened had any real consequence, as those consequences threatened to shift Peter Parker's character into new, unfamiliar territory. This is only one small example of an infinite multitude that demonstrate just how much damage constantly bouncing back to the factory settings on these stories does to stakes in Marvel and DC. Another great example is Jean Grey, the character who headlined the Paramount X-Men story, The Dark Phoenix Saga by Chris Claremont. That story ends, spoiler alert, with the inescapable tragedy of her sacrifice to quell the all-consuming flames of the Phoenix Force raging within her. That moment was painfully sad for readers back then, but the story deserved that emotional punch with the finale. It made the events before it more meaningful than they possibly could have been without it. As the years went by though, the editorial team weren't happy with one of the most popular X-Men being dead, so Marvel's best had to find a way to bring her back to comics. Okay, that isn't so bad, right? Well, as the years went by, another writer thought that Jean Grey's time had come, again. And again, a few years went by and she returned to life. That's the simple version, by the way, one that doesn't mention the variety of fake Jean Greys that have appeared over the years, or Zorn, whoever that is. The meaning of her death by this point is as powerful as Jean Grey is dead. It doesn't have any impact anymore. Actually, it's worse than that. People aren't even sure whether or not she's still alive, not a clone or alien imposter. The most searched Jean Grey related query online today is Jean Grey dead? That's terrible! Fans don't even know. I think all of Jean Grey's stories of living, dying, and living again demonstrate just how damaging this severe lack of consequence can be in Marvel and DC storytelling. But just in case any of you still think that I'm presenting some crazy one-off examples, here's a quick montage of meaningless consequences in Marvel and DC. Peter Parker discovered that his entire life was actually a lie, as he was the clone of Ben Reilly, the true Spider-Man. But later on, he discovered that actually Ben Reilly was the clone, and Peter Parker truly is the definitive Spider-Man and a real person. Barry Allen sacrificed himself to save the entire multiverse, and that was later reversed with him coming back to life. Superman was killed by Doomsday, and his mantle was fought over by many would-be Supermen until Superman returned to life. Captain America died, leading to Bucky Barnes becoming Cap. Steve was later revived and given back to S.H.I.E.L.D., but later on, he had the super soldier serum removed from him, turning him into an old man, leading to Falcon becoming Captain America. Up until Steve Rogers regained his youth, becoming Cap again, but that was actually a reality-warped Hydra agent Captain America created by the Red Skull. But then, the non-reality warped Steve Rogers returned and became Captain America again, for the third time. Or does the Hydra one not count? The entire Marvel universe was wiped out by a cataclysmic clash of realities, but it later turned into this huge mix of new worlds, which later fused into the old Marvel universe again. Okay, that was too much, but I hope it makes the point that bizarre situations like Jean Grey's aren't anomalous, but part of an era-spanning trend. Some argue that this is just part of the charm of comics and that we should accept it, but I think there's a limit to that. Consequences are the lifeblood of stories, and if we just accept that they don't matter, how can we care about these stories? I think there are ways to fix this problem before it becomes something much worse. Let's look at some potential solutions. Okay, one strategy is to completely restart the universe, giving creators the chance to take the characters and stories we love in completely new directions without the weight of the past. DC have tried to re-energise their continuity with the reboot strategy, as we've seen most recently in the New 52, a complete reimagining of the mythos with younger versions of the characters debuting in new origin stories. I think the New 52's fate, getting soft rebooted back to something resembling the original continuity, proves that this is more of a superficial solution rather than an actual fix. A reboot gives you the opportunity to twist what we know, but that also comes with the pressure of replacing the universe that fans have loved for years and years. That pressure to stay true to what came before is a constraint that's just as limiting as the rules of the continuity that was discarded, and the New 52 proved that with quote-unquote new versions of characters that were for the most part unchanged from their original counterparts. Despite the strong similarity to what came before, the pressure was still there to return to the past, and that led to the New 52 merging with the essence of the past without losing the history of either universe. Yeah, I still don't understand the DC Rebirth thing, but I think it proves the point that the reboot might resemble a solution to this problem, but it's far from actually being one. The other approach that both Marvel and DC have taken for years is the Elseworlds approach. Elseworlds stories are tales told outside of the mainline Marvel and DC continuities, giving creators complete freedom to tell stories that do proper justice to their characters and let them move forward, without the constraints of continuity reversing these choices. This has been Marvel and DC's way of exploring riskier ideas with legacy characters without endangering the status quo. I know that Elseworlds sounds like a place for creators to cathartically release every crazy idea they've ever had, which, it is, but it's also been a place of super exciting experimentation. The stories that have come out of experimentation have given me confidence in a third approach to the problem of binding continuity that I'll get into later. One of the most famous Elseworlds stories is Batman the Killing Joke by Alan Moore. Everyone who's ever dipped their toes in the pool of popular culture knows about the legendary rivalry of Batman and the Joker. One embodies what it means to rise up after being broken, becoming something greater, and the other embodies chaos, unfettered by humanity, and their dueling ideals trap them in an eternal cycle of combat with each other. Over the decades, the relationship between the two has evolved into one that can't be reduced to that of hero and villain, and with that evolution, fans have asked the question that's always been at the heart of this endless battle: how does it end? Alan Moore dared to answer that question in The Killing Joke and end their feud once and for all, and fans to this day consider it to be one of, if not the most, influential Batman story ever written. This story is celebrated for its authenticity. It is truly dedicated to its impossible mission to solve the unsolvable, in ways that continuity-bound stories can't. The story did so well that it's no longer an Elseworlds story. It's officially part of DC canon, and I think that speaks volumes about how much of a problem the constraints of continuity have become. That writers that are working outside of it are the only ones who are able to tell stories that really move characters forward. The question of how Batman and Joker's battle ends is at the core of their complex relationship, and we've seen loads of adaptations take on this question to great success. But seeing an answer to this problem in comic book continuity where it began is where it matters most. Look at the most recent major Batman-Joker story, Joker War. Harley Quinn arms two explosives, one on herself and the other on a tied-up Joker, and then runs into the raging fires of the burning Ace Chemicals building, giving Batman enough time to save only one person. This moment should be extremely intense, as Batman's being forced to break his code by indirectly killing his greatest foe, but we know that Joker's going to somehow make it out of this, which he immediately does, pages later. So this moment has no real power. DC will never allow the Batman-Joker conflict to end, and I think this permanent lack of resolution could one day damage one of the greatest rivalries in all of storytelling, and I don't want that. I want mainline comics to have the courage to tell their stories honestly, ending them when the time comes, rather than repeating the same thing time and time again until it's rendered powerless. I know, it's hard to imagine Marvel and DC actually doing this, moving forward with new stories and new characters when the time comes, but I think Marvel's most successful Elseworlds experiment proves that this could work. In 2000, Marvel launched the Ultimate imprint of comics, an entirely new continuity that was separate from the main one, in which they could reintroduce long-established legends of the Marvel canon with a modern setting and a more grounded tone. What really made this work so well was the presence of real consequence. As this wasn't the mainline continuity, there were no longer any constraints on Marvel's storytelling, and as a result, we got to see ideas that were beyond the limits of the main continuity. Sure, some of these were a little bit crazy, like Cannibal Hulk, ugh, but we also got to see the stories of certain heroes have a beginning, middle, and end. Brian Michael Bendis' Ultimate Spider-Man is seen as one of the greatest versions of the character ever. I think a huge part of that is down to the fact that we saw his story come to a natural end. Okay, fine, it involves one weird return from the dead moment, but that aside, his story arc ended, leaving Bendis in a position where he needed to replace Peter Parker, something that was once attempted in main Marvel canon, which ended in catastrophic, legacy-damaging failure. I guess that a lot of you already are thinking of a certain someone in regards to taking over as Spider-Man, and that's because that person was invented here. Brian Michael Bendis introduced Miles Morales as the next Spider-Man, and that choice was met with immense hatred and fear. But look at where Miles is now. He's headlined his own movie franchise, and he's single-handedly spearheaded the launch of a whole new console generation with his own game. Miles is proof that, if done well, Marvel can introduce new characters worthy of the legacy that they must inherit. And this is exactly what I want to see in the mainline continuity. I think Marvel and DC can learn a lot from shonen manga in Japan in this respect. No matter how popular the property, with the exception of One Piece, which will never end, manga creators give their characters a beginning, middle, and an end. A complete journey that's satisfying and rewards you for going along for the ride. So far, we're only getting this kind of meaningful narrative completion in Elseworld stories, and I think that's wrong. Marvel and DC should have complete stories for our favourite characters that allow them to rest, otherwise they're no longer real to us. They become concepts, not characters, ideas that always exist within the universe, ideas that we can't relate to on a human level. I think there's one comic book character, perhaps the most popular one, who demonstrates the importance of meaningful character progression in mainline comics, and that character is Batman. We all know how his journey begins. It's a lonely crusade, a one-man war against all of crime. It's one that's waged by an angry, broken man, striking fear into the hearts of monsters to satiate his endlessly burning desire for vengeance. That, for a long time, was Batman's status quo, until writers decided to change that and help him grow out of his pain. That started with Dick Grayson, the first Robin, an opportunity for Batman to both mould the boy into a new weapon against crime, but also to help him get the justice he never could. Over the decades, we've seen Batman raise loads of new heroes to join him in his mission, but crucially, these characters have all helped change him too. Batman's mission started out as a lonely one, but now he has a family by his side again, one that's helped him heal, and evolve into a symbol of hope for Gotham, someone who fights for justice rather than vengeance. Batman's one of the most popular fictional characters in the history of storytelling, and he's still one of the most popular characters in comics today, and I think that's because readers can see his progress as a character, no longer fighting angrily and alone. Readers feel rewarded for reading about the Dark Knight for so long, and I think he proves that meaningful progression is vital, and can't be something that's missing from Marvel and DC's continuity. I think that no matter where you stand in this debate, you can see that comic book stories are thriving right now. The MCU's just wrapped up Wandavision and is well into Falcon and Winter Soldier, and both of these series have masterfully started to explore a whole new phase of story possibilities without the support of legacy characters like Captain America and Iron Man, letting their stories end in ways that honour them and passing the legacies onto characters worthy of them. And I think the MCU proves that if Marvel and DC really committed to moving forward with their characters in comic continuity, pushing past what's comfortable and entering the unknown, I know that they'll find a future that's not only worthy of what's come before it, but one day maybe even better. Thank you so much for watching. If you liked what you saw, please leave a like and subscribe for more. If you didn't like what you saw, don't dislike, just leave a comment about what you think I could do differently, and hey, while you're down there, why don't you tell me about what you might like to see on the channel in the future? Also, hit that bell icon, and I'll see you all in the next one.